Hello world, it's Austin. Let's talk about being transgender and Christian. So I recently read this book by Father James Martin. It's called Building a Bridge: How the Catholic Church and the LGBT Community Can Enter into a Relationship of Respect, Compassion, and Sensitivity. It's a mouthful of a subtitle, but I really liked it. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you know I don't often talk about Catholic perspectives because I'm not personally Catholic, and so I don't feel like I can speak for that community. But if you are somebody who's Catholic or who grew up Catholic, this book might be one that might be helpful for you because it's basically sanctioned by a bunch of cardinals and archbishops and bishops of different dioceses. Father Martin does a really good job of staying sort of within the lane of Catholic orthodoxy, but also making it very clear that the Catholic Church has a lot that they need to do to reach out to LGBT people. So you might be interested in this book. Check it out. I thought it was really good. But the thing I want to talk about today is one story that Father Martin brings up. He brings up the story of Zacchaeus. And if you were ever a kid in Bible school, you probably sang the story about Zacchaeus being a wee little man and how he climbs up a tree to see Jesus. If you're not familiar, that's okay, because I'm going to read the story to you. This is the story of Jesus and Zacchaeus. You can find it in Luke 19, verses 1 through 10, so not very long. Jesus entered into Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not because he was short in stature. So Zacchaeus ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see Jesus because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry down, for I must stay at your house today." So Zacchaeus hurried down and was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, "He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost." So Father Martin in his book points out 2 things about this story. The first one being that Jesus offers community and inclusion and welcome and relationship to Zacchaeus before anything else. Before he asks Zacchaeus to do anything or asks anybody to change anything, the first thing Jesus does is offer community and welcome and openness and relationship. And that's a really important thing when we think about how Christian communities should interact with LGBT communities. The first thing you do is say, "Hey, you are welcome." The second thing Father Martin points out is that Zacchaeus doesn't stop being a tax collector at the end of this story. Jesus doesn't go into this saying, like, I'm going to invite Zacchaeus, or I'm going to go to Zacchaeus' house and we're going to have this relationship, and then I'm going to get him to change who he is. That's not what's going on here. At the end of this story, Zacchaeus doesn't say, "Oh, being a tax collector is a horrible thing. I'm aligned with the Roman Empire, and tax collectors are known for stealing from people, and I understand you're asking me to be somebody different." That's not what's happening. Instead, Zacchaeus changes his actions, but Jesus never asks him to stop being who he is. For Father Martin, this is a pretty clear metaphor for what's going on between lots of Christian leaders and LGBT folks. It's like Christian leaders are asking LGBT folks to change who they are, and Jesus doesn't do that here. Jesus doesn't ask for Zacchaeus to change who he is. And so Father Martin's point is, well, then we shouldn't be asking people to change who they are either. So I really love Father Martin's interpretations of this story, and I want to drill down deeper because I think there's more that we can say about this. The first thing I want to throw out there is just sort of a thought experiment that was posed to me when I was in seminary. I was in a seminary course on the Synoptic Gospels, which are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and my professor at one point, we were reading this story, and he said, "How would you view this story differently if Zacchaeus wasn't actually a bad guy?" There's the point in the story where Zacchaeus says, "If I have defrauded anyone, I will repay them back 4 times as much." And my professor said, what if Zacchaeus wasn't saying that because he actually had defrauded people and he was trying to make up for it? What if he had been a perfectly legal tax collector this whole time and hadn't done anything wrong, and was using that to sort of prove his point by saying, if I've done this thing, I will give them everything, And so my professor asked us, how would you see this story differently if Zacchaeus wasn't a bad guy turning good? What if Zacchaeus was somebody who was marginalized by his community because of who he was, his job? What if it wasn't his fault? So I'm not going to go deeper on that one, but I just want to throw it out there because I think it's an interesting thought experiment when we think about people or characters in the Bible who are put outside the community. Is it because of something they did, or is it because of community ideas about them? Sometimes we don't know. The second thing I think it's important to recognize and realize about this passage is that even though Zacchaeus doesn't have to stop being a tax collector, and God doesn't ask that, Jesus doesn't ask that of him, Zacchaeus does recognize that he is the wealthiest person in town and says he will give away half of everything he has. So he's not asked to change who he is, but he is asked to change some behaviors that will bring life to his community. And so I think that can be a powerful word to LGBT Christians and folks in general who we may not be asked to change our identity, who we are, but we are always asked, as all people are asked, to give of ourselves for the life of the world. And I think Zacchaeus is a great example of that for us. So, you aren't being asked by God to not be trans, or not be bisexual, or not be gay, but you might be asked in some way to give of yourself in order to give life to the community and to become part of God's abundant kingdom. The last thing I want to focus on is Jesus' words that salvation has come to this house. Salvation has come to the house of Zacchaeus. What does that mean? Because I think a lot of us, when we think of the word salvation, we have heard it in a context of like being saved from hell, right? The word that's used here, the Greek word, is soteria, which means like to be saved or to be rescued from. But what are we being rescued from? So specifically in the Gospel of Luke, salvation is seen as something that happens in the right here and right now. It's not something that has to do with heaven and hell later on. In the Gospel of Luke, we begin with Jesus' first sermon in Luke 4, where he says he's here to proclaim release to the captives and good news to the poor, and to let the oppressed go free and proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Everything that has to do with salvation and saving in Luke is about the right now of people's actual lives. So when we read this section where Jesus says salvation has come to this house, salvation has come to Zacchaeus' house, we have to ask what is being saved, what is being rescued in this scenario. And when Jesus says salvation has come to this house because he too is a son of Abraham, it's very clear that Jesus is sort of like putting the community back together. Jesus is saving Zacchaeus from being an outcast and asking the people of the community to recognize this person as one of their family members. So I really love this story because it's very much one of like Jesus meeting somebody who is an outcast, who may or may not have done a lot of stuff wrong, but Jesus doesn't ask him to change who he is. He asks him to allow him to come to lunch at his house, and then Zacchaeus of his own free will says, you know what, I'm going to give back to this community, and Jesus says, perfect, you are a part of this community. And that's such a powerful story, I think, for trans Christians who often feel like they are supposed to change who they are in order to be let into community, or to be saved in a much more sort of end-of-the-world type sense. But what if salvation is happening right in your life right now? What can you be saved from, and how is Jesus acting out that saving work in a kingdom that's happening all the time? So that's what I wanted to leave you with this month, everybody. I hope you enjoy this story of Zacchaeus. Check out Father Martin's book if you're interested. I really enjoyed it. It's definitely a first step in sort of Catholic discourse, but it's a really important first step. Special thanks for the video this month go to Emily and Sebastian and Jean and David and Kieran and Thea and Rachel and Olivia and Guy and Emily and Avery and Jamie and all of the other patrons over at the Patreon page. If you want to check out my work at Patreon that helps support the work that I do and helps fund me going out to talk with other churches about this kind of stuff, you can check that link out in the description below. And if you liked this sort of different lens on a biblical passage, you're really going to like the book that I just wrote. It's called Transforming the Bible and the Lives of Transgender Christians, and I'll put links below for that as well. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you back here next month. Peace.